Thank you, Mike. Good evening, y'all. My name is Harold, and I'm an alcoholic. Harold. And by the grace of God and the fellowship I've found here in Alcoholics Anonymous, it hadn't been necessary for me to have a drink alcohol since February of 1970. I take no credit for that. I had the good fortune to walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I sat down. And I took advantage of everything that was being given away. Now, my home group is the Monday night Back to Basics group in Annapolis, Maryland, which everyone knows is the best group in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here. I want to thank Mike and his lovely wife for asking me to come down here. And I got to tell you, it was some things God just seems to move in ways we can't understand. I was telling Mike in the last week or so, I've had at least 4 people I sponsor pass away, die. Then 2 nights ago, I get a call from my cousin. One of my cousins passed away in New York. And just before I left to come down here, I get a call from another one of the people I sponsored. His sister passed. And I was kind of on a bummer trip. And I said, let me go down here in Texas. Maybe it'll change the environment in my head a little bit. And I came in here, and it's just wonderful. I can't tell you how pleased and how really excited I am about being here. I've met so many wonderful people and had such wonderful conversations. Last night we were at a meeting. Mike took me to a meeting, and it was just extraordinary. But what was really amazing about it, there was a guy there for the first time, at first meeting of ever, at Alcoholics Anonymous, and you could see he was captivated. His eyes got big when he listened to people share and talk about the love and understanding and compassion that we have for him. And he walked into the door for the first time. And I can see God is in his heaven and all's right with the world. I was, when I first came in, and I looked at the schedule, and I saw some of the speakers, and they were all great. All the speakers were really wonderful. I loved Hank, and then Tom, and oh, she just spoke, and it's out of my head. Cammie. just a wonderful talks that since I've been here. And I was really amazed when I looked at the program and I saw how many Al-Anons are here. And I love Al-Anons. We get a lot of transfers. I love Al-Anon. Al-Anon is, when I first got sober, I had come out of a hospital, and one of my dearest friends was a nurse, and she had bought a house with another nurse, a duplex, and not knowing that the other nurse was a chronic alcoholic, she almost burnt the house down. And she came to me and asked what do I think she should do. So I talked to my sponsor, and he said, take her to Al-Anon. And so for a whole year, I took her to Al-Anon, and I got to know Al-Anon, I got to know the program, and it's just amazing. And Al-Anon is just an incredible program for people who have to deal with alcoholics. And later on, I'll talk a little bit more about this. When I first came into AA, I was on the volunteer board for the New York City Intergroup. And the New York City Intergroup in those days was right around the corner from the Al-Anon office on Lexington Avenue. And every night they would close the Al-Anon office at 5, and Lois would come across into the AA office around the corner. And I sat and talked to Lois for years. Got to know her really, really very well. As a matter of fact, when we moved up to Westchester County, we met at Stepping Stones for about a year. We formed a cluster group, Sephiron, Rockland, and Westchester County. We formed the intergroup, and we met at Stepping Stones with Lois there quite often. She was an incredible lady, just wonderful. I'll tell you one quick story about her. I spoke at the Bill W. anniversary 2 years back. And they had it at the Hilton in Manhattan. And I got there a little early, and there's a little waiting room upstairs over the stage. And I walked up, and who's sitting in the room by herself but Lois? Hadn't seen her for a while, and we sat and chatted. And she told me the story about Bill when she wanted to write the chapter to the wives in our book. And Bill wouldn't let her do it. And she wrote her own book. I see you got a copy of it in the back there. Lois remembers. And she was so happy about that. God bless her. She's a beautiful lady. I've had the extraordinary good fortune to serve as a trustee on the board of trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was talking to a few people. I've traveled around the world as a trustee. There aren't a lot of places in the world I haven't been to. And I'll talk about that a little further on. I told Mike to keep an eye on the clock, because if we go right, I start talking, we'll be here for a while. When I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm an old history teacher. As a matter of fact, I taught history in high school while I was doing a graduate degree. And so I graduated toward the archives. When I got to New York, all the trustees have to serve on at least 1 or 4 committees, 4 separate committees or subcommittees, if you're a trustee or a director. And I was both. And so every time the openings came up, I volunteered for archives. And I got to read a lot of Bill Wilson's writings. I got to read a lot of his writings that aren't even published. And Bill was an extraordinary man. He really was. You can tell from his writings, and the people I've known Nell Wing very well, and she was very close to Lois and Bill. Guys like Jack Alexander and Bernie Smith, who Jack worked for. And I got to get a sense of what Bill had in mind when he started this thing. You know, they say Bill Wilson was a stockbroker. Bill was a stock speculator. Bill used to sell fast talking to slow thinking people. That's what Bill Wilson did. But God gave Bill an insight. Gave him an insight. He could look down the road, and he could see that this thing was gonna be good, but it had to be in a context that alcoholics could understand. How they could understand, and when we had a little 6-step program we got from the Oxford movement, and he said we had to change that because there were too many loopholes, too many ways for the drunks to wiggle out. So he changed it, and he made it a 12-step program. And those kinds of insights are why we're here today. But one of the things that Bill understood, and he understood going in, and he got this from Father Dowling and Sam Shoemaker. He said that what you have to do, Bill, is tell people what happened to you. Tell them your experience, not what you heard or your opinion. Tell them what happened to you. And that's how we got started. One alcoholic talking to another. He would say that the power is in our experience. This power we keep hearing about everywhere we go. Every time you talk around, you turn around, talking about find the power, get the power. The power is right here. The power is in our experience. The power is in our collective and individual experience. And that experience are in these rooms. He used to say that if you have an idea and I have an idea, we each have one idea. But if I give you my idea and you give me your idea, we have 2 ideas. And that's how it works. That's the magic of how it works. One alcoholic talking to another. And so I got to know exactly how it works. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't believe any of that. I come out of the streets of New York. I was born and raised in Spanish Harlem. You grew up in Spanish Harlem, you grow up very quickly, or you might not grow up at all. My old neighborhood, by today's standards, they would probably consider me an entrepreneur. In those days, I was a hustler. I used to find stuff before it officially got lost. Yeah. See, because if it was small enough, I just stole it. If it was too big to carry, I'll lay down next to it and claimed it. A day at a time wasn't nothing new to me. In my old neighborhood, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is negotiable. I understood that a long time ago. I never will forget one time they sent some social workers in there to study us. One of them asked me how far it was to the subway. I told him I didn't know. Nobody ever made it. You come up out of that kind of environment, you understand a day at a time. You understand that? And I think that growing up in Harlem in that kind of environment gave me a certain character. I think it happens to all of us. Our culture, our socialization as we grow, we become who we are. We become our experience. And that's what happens. And it's very difficult to change that. And that's what happened to me. My father was that way. My father was a beautiful man. I loved him dearly. But he was an alcoholic. And he drank. He had a business in Harlem back in the 30s, which is actually unheard of. He ran a business and he was doing very well, but he was an alcoholic. He taught me how to read when I was a little kid. I read books like Dostoevsky. I read the Rubaiyats of Omar Khayyam and Khalil Gibran when I was a kid. He would teach me to read. I'd sit at his desk and he'd teach me, but he'd go out and he'd start to drink. And he'd come back and nobody would know him. He'd scream and he'd holler and the kids would all run and hide. And nobody knew what was wrong with him. And when he died when I was 8. And at the funeral, people would come by his casket and say he was a good man, very good man, helped a lot of people. But he drank. And when he drank, he changed. And I had no idea what that change was or what it meant until I got in here. I think what happens to alcoholics is that we kind of build this wall out here. Everybody does. We put this wall out here. And anytime somebody would try to get to know you a little bit, you put another brick in that wall. And somebody would come to try to understand you and learn a little bit about you, and you put another brick in that wall. And pretty soon that wall will get higher and higher and higher. And one day I looked around and nobody could get to me because of the wall. But I was behind the wall and I couldn't get out. I love the story my old sponsor used to tell about how you can tell the difference between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic. It's an old story. I know everybody in here has heard it, but I like the way I tell it, so I'm going to tell it. There's 2 doorways at the end of a hallway. And over one doorway there's a sign and it says peace and happiness. And inside the other door is a guy with a baseball bat. Now, the non-alcoholic walks down the hallway, sees the 2 doors, walks through the door, there's the guy with the bat, hits him right in the head, comes out, goes across the hall, sees the sign, peace and happiness, goes through the door and has peace and happiness for the rest of his life. The alcoholic comes down the hallway, the same 2 doors. He walks through the door, there's the guy with the bat, hits him right in the head. Turns around, comes back down the hallway, turns around, goes back up the hallway, same 2 doors, walks right through the door. The guy's in there with the bat, hits him right in the head again. Turns around, comes back down the hallway, turns around, goes back up the hallway, but this time he stops. And he thinks to himself, maybe he won't be in there this time. Yeah. Maybe I can get away with it. He goes through the door and the alcohol and the guy with the bat is gone and the alky goes looking for him. That's us. That's us. I went to school in Manhattan, and I was a good student. And I went to a technical high school, and I learned about math and physics and the rest of it. And the Korean War was breaking out, and I knew I was going to get drafted. And I don't want to get drafted. So I did the cool, slick New York thing. I joined the National Guard. And it was almost the minute I signed the papers, I got federalized, the whole unit. I joined probably the oldest black military organization in the United States. And it was the the 369th. They used to originally were the 9th Cavalry, the old Buffalo soldiers. The 9th Cavalry, as you know, rode up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt in the Spanish-American War. Well, I met guys that had been drinking since they rode up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt in the Spanish-American War. And I got into this outfit with these old regular Army guys, and they drank. I mean, they really drank. And I think if I had to pinpoint where my alcoholism took off, that's where it would be. In any event, the unit got federalized. They wound up, we went over to Korea, came back. Vietnam was just breaking out. And they sent me to school. I had technical experience and background. They sent me down to Fort Bliss, guided missile radar school down in Fort Bliss, Texas, right on the border of Juarez. And I stayed down in Juarez almost 2 years. And then went out to White Sands, out to the guided missile range, and studied guided missiles for a while. But while I was in Juarez, when I was a kid, I started boxing. I boxed a lot. You have to learn how to box in Harlem. You learn how to fight or run. It's best you know how to do both. So I started boxing down in Texas and at Fort Bliss. And I'll never forget one time we were on our way over into Juarez. I think at one time you could go walk across the bridge into Juarez. It cost a penny to go across the bridge. And we were wandering down the streets of Juarez. Buddy and I there was a drink called Oso Negro Gin, Black Bear Gin. I'll never forget it. Walking down the street, breaking gin bottles on the lamppost, which the Mexican police take a very dim view of. And we wound up in a Mexican jail. Well, when I was a kid, we used to go to see these Errol Flynn movies. And he'd be a pirate, and they'd be on a pirate ship, sword fighting and going on. And then they'd catch him and throw him in the dungeons. And you see these big blocks of wood that they put people on and chains on the wall they hang people on. I thought that was make-believe till I got in a Mexican jail. The thing about it, I was boxing, and I had a fight coming up. And my CO was a fight fan. And he came and he got me out. Just got me out. And I think that's the real dilemma of the alcoholic. We get into the damnedest thing, and somehow we manage to get out. I'll never forget one time they asked me to leave jail. They asked me to leave. Little town, upstate New York, sitting on the curb, sucking out of a wine bottle. The police came by and said, "Get in." Took me to their jail, brand new jail. They had just built this jail. They put me in a cell. I laid down, lit a cigarette, and I fell asleep, and the mattress caught on fire. They took me out of that cell, put me across the hall in another cell, laid down, lit a cigarette, fell asleep, the mattress caught on fire. The guy came in there and said, "You have to leave." And they put me out. I was indignant. I really didn't want to go. It never occurred to me how bizarre that was. We have a disease that will protect itself. We have a disease that will tell us there's nothing wrong with you. And when that curtain comes down, we can't see the real. You can't see reality. My old friend Clancy out in California calls it, we have a disease of perception. We perceive what we believe is the truth. And it never is. Not for alcoholics. And so my alcoholism began a long time ago. I never knew it, and I don't think any of us really do. We look back in hindsight and we can see all the warning signs are there, but we can't see it for ourselves. I'll never forget once I was in Huntsville, Alabama, going to guided missile school in Redstone. Actually, it was the time Werner von Braun was starting to build an intercontinental missile there. That was my background. I was guided missile systems when I was in the military airman. And I was out on the post drinking in the CO's club and decided to go back. I was living off the post, and I decided to turn around. I was going back to town, and I decided to go back on the post. Made this what I considered to be a fantastic U-turn. Not supposed to make U-turns on them back roads in Alabama. Made this fantastic turn, and as near as I could figure it out, they had to be in the trunk of my car. Because the minute I made that turn, there they were, 2 6'6" Alabama state troopers. I spent the majority of my life in law enforcement. It is not a good idea to argue with state troopers under the best of circumstances. But for me to argue with them in Alabama is insane. The thing about it is, I got away with it. They looked at me and took it, let this one go. They let me go. So we never see ourselves the way we really are. Other people see us. So I went through the military. I spent a lot of time on active duty. I came back as the unit got deactivated, and I went back. We were living in the South Bronx at the time. And then another curious thing occurred to me. When I first came out the military, I had a lot of good skills. I mean, I was a commissioned officer. I had run guided missile systems for a long time. I'm probably one of the few people that know how to arm a barometric fuse for a hydrogen warhead. They taught me how to do that. I often wonder what would happen if I was drunk in front of one of them consoles and hit the wrong button. So when I got back to the South Bronx, they didn't seem to have a big demand for people that knew how to arm barometric fuses. So I took a test, and I'm a good test taker. I took a test, and I wound up on the New York City Police Department. And I was a cop in New York for almost 10 years. I walked the beat. In those days, we didn't have those, back in the 60s, we didn't have a fancy squad car. I walked the beat. And I knew everybody. They put me, the first house I worked out of was 3-4 up in Richmond Heights. And I walked the beat from 116th Street up to 150th Street. And I knew everybody in the street. That's where I grew up. I knew every pimp, every prostitute, every dope dealer. I knew everybody. They would see me coming down the street walking, and they'd wave at me. Yeah. I remember I locked the guy up for being drunk once, and they had to carry me into the courthouse. And it was about the same time that I did another really alcoholic thing. I got married. And the reason I got married is because my brother got married. And all the gang was breaking up, and everybody was getting married and living lives, and I got married. And the thing about it is that I really didn't want to be married. I got married because everybody else did. I wanted to be out in the street. I had no sense of responsibility. And I got married, and I married a beautiful person. Alcoholics always marry beautiful people. Al-Anons will tell you that. I married a beautiful person, and we began to raise a family, but I was an alcoholic. And I wanted to drink, and I drank, and this time we were raising a family, had 2 small boys. And I love my family. I love my wife and my children, but I love to drink, and I wanted to be out in the street drinking and running with the guys. I'll never forget many times I'd come home from work, and my wife would have prepared a really nice meal. And I'd walk in, and I'd walk straight to the back of the house and close the door and start drinking. I never touched it. I couldn't promise to take my kids to the movies or to the circus, because I knew by the weekend I'd be drunk, and I wouldn't take them anywhere. And all I did was drink and drink and drink. I got trouble on the job. They like you to come in from time to time. I used to get these big letters in the mailbox. Big letters, red letters on the outside said, "Pay up or die." Everybody was after me. I owed everybody. I was in trouble on the job. I was in trouble at home. Everywhere I went, everybody seemed to be after me. And one day it occurred to me, and if you can do this, you can take this disease to the moon. One day it occurred to me it was all their fault. It was all their fault. If they'd stop asking me for money and these bill collectors would leave me alone. I never will forget one time I went to my credit union. I was going to get one loan, pay off all the other loans. And I did. They gave me the money. I went to, naturally, I stopped and discussed the matter with my financial manager, the bartender. Didn't pay nothing. And everybody was after me. And so, and if you can do this, you can take this disease to the moon. I was all their fault, and I left. I walked out of my house. Beautiful family, 2 lovely children, a wife that loved me. And I walked out. I wound up living in one room. And I'll never forget it. You see some, you don't see them too often, but you see some pictures around the room, some of the rooms of AA, with a guy sitting on the bed, two men trying to talk to him. That was me. With a dangling light bulb and a broken window shade, trying to find peace of mind. And finally, I couldn't even afford the room. And I wound up out in the street, living under a railroad trestle. Sleeping in a dark, dingy basement. And I had a family. I had a family who loved me. I had a family that would love to see me and help me. But I had the pride and the ego of the alcoholic. I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't ask anybody. I would stay out there and rather suffer than go and ask for help. And I remember laying in that basement one time. And it was dark, dingy, dirt floor. And I remember coming to. And I looked around and I thought to myself, what are you doing in this basement? I come from a good family. I have a relatively good education. What are you doing in this basement? And I really had no answer for that. So I did what I always did when I got into a jackpot. I was going to pray. When I was a little kid and they took us to church, and they did, I guess everybody, your mother say you're going to church, you go to church. Take you by the hand, you don't have nothing to say about it. So I went to church, and I listened very carefully to what the preacher said. And what I heard the preacher say was, God was somebody you could make a deal with. You do this for me, and I'll do that for you. And that was my understanding. And sometimes it worked. And that's what I did. I said, God, get me out of this. And nothing happened. At least I thought nothing happened. I know now God was right there. God hadn't gone anywhere. and all I had to do was turn around and reach out. One of my favorite books in the other big book, the Bible, is in Ecclesiastes. And the Ecclesiastics write in their book, they say for everything there's a season and a purpose for everything under the heaven. There's a time to be born and a time to die. I believe there's a line somewhere. There is a point beyond which God will not permit us to endure pain. We all come to that point at some time. And when some of us reach it, we die. When some of us reach it, we find our way into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. But whether we die or whether we come here, God's arranged that we don't have to suffer anymore. A favorite writer of mine is a man named Walter Benton. In one of his writings, he describes the alcoholic. He's not writing about alcoholic, but applies to us. He writes that our days are of time and hours. And as the clock hand turns, a circle closes in upon us, and a black, timeless night sucks us in like quicksand. It receives us totally without a rain check or a parachute or a key to heaven, or a last long look. We spiral down and down and down and down, and then for some inexplicable reason, God reaches in and plucks some of us out and sets us into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've long since stopped trying to understand why some of us are here and some of us are not. God has a plan. I believe that fervently, that we are part of that. I believe that God has a reason for us to be here and to touch other lives. It's my own personal view. And so that's what happened to me. I was in this basement, and I had this kind of a revelation. It didn't change anything in my mind, because the next day I was out with some of my buddies. We had just invested in a bottle of wine. And somehow I had managed to hang on to my chauffeur's license. And I was running dumps out to the landfill out in Staten Island. It's the same landfill they used after 9/11. It was brand new in those days. And I was on my way back from the landfill with the truck, and I blacked out. Truck ran off the road, hit an embankment. Nothing really happened. Cops came and got it back up on the road. And they suggested I go get an x-ray, and I did. Went and had an x-ray, and I forgot about it. Well, the next morning, I invested in a bottle of wine with some of my colleagues, and I get this phone call, and it says, you have to come down to the hospital right away. Well, I tried to explain to this lady, I just put my money in a bottle of wine, and I wasn't going nowhere. Well, she said that if you don't come down, we're going to send somebody out and get you, which is the last thing I needed. So not to make a long story longer, I went down there and I found out I had tuberculosis. And I had it so severely, they wouldn't let me go back home. They put me in an ambulance and shipped me out to an isolation ward, way out on the tip end of Staten Island. And I spent the next year and a half out there. And I look back today, and I realize it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And it may seem strange saying getting a serious disease like tuberculosis was a good thing, but for me it was. While I was in the hospital, you're in a bed by yourself, kind of isolated, and they even take you to, you can't get out of the bed, they even take you to the restroom in a wheelchair. And all I had time to do was to think. Look at my life. And I look back and I saw every single time I got into any difficulty. Any single time I got into a fight or went to jail, anytime something bad happened to me, I was drinking or I was drunk. From the time I was a little kid. And I think it was there that the cement block lifted. And the message went through, there's something wrong with you. It has to do with alcohol. Nobody came running down the hallway with a donut and a cup of coffee. We got Amy. What happened was, the supervising nurse on my ward was one of you sneaky people. And she was watching my shenanigans all the time. Because I was running games in the hospital just like I did out in the street. And it was the night before I was to be discharged. And I was sitting on the side of the bed, very quiet, very subdued, which is not my normal state. And she came by and she asked me what was the matter, and I told her. I think for the first time in my life, of grace entering into my life, I told her I was afraid. I was afraid to go back out in the street. While I was in the hospital, I was in a protected environment. I had everything I needed, and I knew that when I went outside, I'd be right back in that rat race again. I'd be right back where I started. I'd be like Alice in Wonderland, running twice as fast to stay exactly where I was. And I told her I was afraid. And she asked me the question I think we all get asked at one time or another. She said, do you really want help? And again, grace entered into my life. I said, yes, I need help. And she arranged for me to get to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got to tell you, I don't know if you ever heard of John Birch Society. Well, they started in Staten Island. John Birch Society is probably the most right-wing, radical political organization there ever was. And they got people on the South Shore of Staten Island think the John Birch Society are liberals. And I went to the first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous on the South Shore of Staten Island. And I knew the minute I walked in there was something wrong. The first thing that I noticed was there weren't any black people in there. I look around here, it ain't changed much. And the second thing that I noticed was this was in February. And there were guys in there that had on white shoes in the winter. They don't wear white shoes in the summertime in Spanish Harlem. I said, these are some very strange people. I was on my way out the door. Before I could get there, a guy walked up to me and he showed me this book. How we doing with time, man?
6 more hours.
You're good. You're good.
Guy walked up to me and he showed me this blue book. And he said to me, everything you will ever need is in this book. And my scheming mind went right to work. If everything I need is in this book, when I came out of that hospital, everything I owned I carried out of there in a shopping bag, and that had a hole in it. I figured that if everything I need is in, I'll read this book and figure out how to get a loan out these people. That's my motivation. I read that book from cover to cover, and I came back. His name was Ellie Andrews. God bless him. He died when I was 15 years old. I still love him. I used to call him my walking stick. I said, Ellie, I can't get a loan out of this book. He said, yes, you can. And you know, he's right. I also read that book 100 times by now. And I can still find answers to questions that I need reading that book. But he said to me, I was going to give him, he said to me, yeah, I'm going to be your sponsor, because you don't have brains enough to get one. and so I was about to give him my 25-cent story of my life's history. And he stopped me dead. He said, not interested in who you are. We're going to find out who you are not. And we're going to get rid of all of that. And who you are will show up. And we started walking through this process. And I love him today for the simplicity. Because I used to think I was a pretty bright guy, but my mind was out in Ethiopia somewhere. I couldn't remember anything. I'd read something in the book he'd tell me to read, and I go back the next day and it was different. And I complain about it. I complained it wasn't there yesterday. And he said that he would explain to me that your mind is changing. You're seeing things differently. And he told me what we were going to do. We're going to connect the dots. That's what we're going to do. Just like in a puzzle, we're going to connect the dots. And just like in the puzzle, when we're finished, we're going to have a picture. And that picture is going to be you. And that's what we started. He told me that the reason Bill Wilson wrote The First Step is he wanted people to know why you're here. Why'd you come in here? Well, you're powerless over alcohol, dummy. That's why you're in here. Your life's unmanageable. You don't have to explain nothing to argue. You don't have to figure nothing out. He said that if you know that you're powerless, and that's your problem, then the solution is to find the power. He wrote step 2. Going to believe that there's a power greater than yourself that can restore you to sanity. You don't have to figure nothing out. Just believe there's a power that can help you. And when you're there, if you're ready, all you have to do is decide to use it. Use that power. Make a decision to turn your will and your life over to that power. And for dummies like me, he wrote a simple prayer. My Creator, give myself to thee. Do with me as your will. Remove from me the bondage of myself. In other words, get out of the way. Most of the stuff that I tried to do didn't work. And that's what he told me. I would call him up and I would complain. I said, when am I going to get a job? Ellie would say, you had a job. That I don't feel good. He said, this may be as well as you'll ever feel. and I say, what do I think I ought to do? He said, read the book. I said, what's in the book? The 12 steps. What's the 12 steps? To get better. Why? You know, then he would come to the point where he would say, shut up. You have no power. You need to find the power. Here's how you do it. That's all you really need to do. Stop asking questions. Connect the dots. And he made it just that simple for me. And we walked through this process. And we got through this. I had to look at myself. Found some interesting things out about myself. Sat down with somebody and I told them about myself. Found out I was a liar and a thief and dishonest. and there's new information for me. Took that fifth step with a priest. And he asked me, do you want to stay that way or do you want to change? Well, I wasn't too sure about that. He said these defects of character might come in handy. And he reminded me. He said what the step says is become willing to have God remove these defects of character. And then he told me the story. He said that a farmer can't grow anything. He sets up the conditions. He can plant the seeds and water the soil. He sets the conditions so the change can take place. God will make the plants grow. A doctor can't heal anybody. He sets up the conditions. He can diagnose the illness, prescribe the medication. He sets the conditions so the change can take place. God will heal a patient. We can't change anything, but we can set the conditions so the change can take place. And then all we have to do is ask. Humbly ask. It was that simplicity that began to change. My old sponsor used to say, you're going to come to a point where you're going to hear a loud popping sound. You all know what that loud popping sound is? That's your head coming out of your butt. Simple. Keep it simple. And we walked through this process and we came to the point where we had to ask God to remove these defects of character. And he gave us another prayer, very simple prayer. Remove from me every single defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. And I didn't understand the time I read it, how valuable that sentence was. Remove from me the defects of character so that I can become useful. I learned a long time ago that our recovery is spiritual. That's what it is. Recovery from alcoholism, as we understand it, is a spiritual recovery, but spirituality cannot occur in a vacuum. If we're going to become spiritual, we have to do something for somebody with no expectation. Bill said it a different way. We have to give it away to keep it. And I began to understand what real spiritual growth was. When I reach out to help someone, I get better. When I made amends, I was prepared to forgive people who had harmed me. I got free. Didn't understand that. Strangest concept. Somebody who harmed me, I would usually break both their legs. I remember one time a guy, I was doing some contract work for the government, and normally if you have a contract, you have to bid it out. But if it's under a certain dollar amount, you can give it away. I had a small contract. Guy came to me and asked if he could have a contract, and I gave it to him. Came back a little while later, and he said, didn't have any money to buy materials, so I fronted him the money to buy the materials. And the guy stiffed me. Took off with my money. I went to his house, I went to his office, could not find this guy anywhere. Now, I have some friends live over in Brooklyn, Flatbush. They specialize in kneecapping. See? And I was going to get a couple of my friends to speak to this guy seriously. At the very least, I was going to back one of my cement trucks up to his house and fill up his living room. Went to my sponsor, told my sponsor what I was going to do, and he said, no, you have to pray for him. Oh, I thought that was the dumbest thing I ever heard. You do not pray for people who steal your money where I come from. But I've been with this guy for a while, and everything he told me had turned out to be true. So I started praying for this guy. You should have heard this prayer. Listen to God, I'm going to pray for this SOB. I hope he have a heart attack. Nothing serious. He shouldn't recover. And anyway, I prayed that prayer. Prayed it for a couple of weeks. And then one day, it was like somebody had pulled a string out of an orange. That knot in my gut was gone. It was gone. I'll never forget it because I was having lunch with another contractor a year later, and he said, you know that guy that stiffed you for that contract last year? I said, yeah. He said, you know he had a heart attack and died? I said, you know I was praying for him? The guy looked me dead in the eye and said, please don't never pray for me. What he taught me was the value of prayer. It taught me the value of prayer. When I asked God to remove those defects of character so that I could become useful, that was real. It wasn't just talk, pie in the sky talk. It was real. God is real. And so it began to give me that strength and understanding about the power of prayer, the power of God, the power that we have within us to be useful. About the same time, when I was in the hospital, my wife had developed cancer and she died. And my two boys were in foster care. And I went to Ellie and I said, Ellie, I need to get my kids out of foster care. And he told me the same thing. He said, you be careful what you pray for. Because when God really wants to punish you, he'll answer your prayer. Got my two boys out. Spent the next 10 years raising them. They're two fine boys now. It wasn't easy, but I raised them both with all their warts and cricks. I raised them both. They're both in AA. They're both police officers. And I think that it was the power that I learned here that I was able to manage it. My mother got diabetes, and she had to have a leg amputated. And I told her that they were going to amputate her leg. And when they were walking her into the operating room, I held her hand all the way there and told her I loved her while they operated and took the leg off. I was able to do that because I had come and found the power here. That's what recovery is about. Life doesn't stop because we get sober. Life's going to keep coming at you hard and fast sometimes. But if you have that power, if you have that power, it's like having God watching your back everywhere you go. And so we learn to take this and use it for the good. And so that's what happened. I remember one night I was in my group, and they had a group conscience, and I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, I was the GSR. Didn't know what a GSR was. They made me the GSR. Well, Ellie said not to worry, and he gave me a service manual. If you can't sleep at night, get a service manual. That'll put you to sleep. And so I started walking through the structure. I became the first district committee member in Richmond County, Staten Island, first DCM. And then my service sponsor was a woman named Jackie Solomon. She was Bill Wilson's secretary, and she called me up and said, there's a vacancy on the World Services Corporate Board. Put your resume in. Well, I really didn't want to do it, but you don't argue with Jackie, so I did. Next thing I know, I'm a director on AA World Services. Those of you who may not know what AA World Services is, that's where your money goes. When you put money in the basket, part of it goes up to AA World Services, and they do all our literature, and translations and all the rest of it. I was chairman of the board of AA World Service. Me, drunk like me, handling all your money. And I spent 4 years on AA World Services, and then I got elected to the Board of Trustees. And I became a trustee of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's probably the greatest gift I've ever been given. I've had the opportunity to travel around the world. There's not a lot of places in the world I haven't been to and seen AA at work. Everywhere. I'll never forget. I was in Scotland one time, up in Glasgow, Scotland. And my host that was hosting me said, "How'd you like to go on a 12-step call after I got there?" I said, "Sure." He drove out to St. Andrews. I don't know if anybody's ever. St. Andrews is a golf course. It is extraordinary. Beautiful mansions all over the place. I mean, it is beautiful. We go inside this mansion, and here's this guy crawling around on his hands and knees, drunk as a skunk. Turns out he was a member of Parliament. We gathered this guy up. I was going down to Blackpool to speak at a convention in Blackpool, England. We took him with us, carried him with us. And I don't know whether this guy is sober or not, but it's one of the most greatest experiences I ever had, just carrying this guy through the process as we went through these places. I remember another time we were having a regional forum, and at the end of the forum, somebody asked, was there any questions? The guy got up and back and asked, how many of our books have been translated into the African language of Swahili? And it turned out there weren't any. And to give you an idea of the dedication of our staff in New York, they had been corresponding with a priest in Kenya and had translated the big book. And they sent us a translation, and not to make a long story longer, 6 months we had the book Alcoholics Anonymous translated into the African language of Swahili. And to show you how God really works, the guy that asked the question was Nyadi Mbongo from Kenya. And he asked if I'd speak at his anniversary, his 10th anniversary. And I spoke at his 10th anniversary, and I gave him the first copy of the big book in Swahili. God asked the question. We have some extraordinary lives that we touch in extraordinary ways. It's unbelievable. One of my favorite pamphlets in the book Alcoholics Anonymous is called A Member's Eye View. If you haven't read it, I would really recommend it. It's a very simple pamphlet. It explains what AA is and what it is not. Very simply. It's the doctor talking to a group of non-alcoholics. One of the things he says is that nothing that we do here is new. Everything that we do here in Alcoholics Anonymous is as old as time itself. The reasons our principles work are because they're true principles, and they will work for anyone. The reason they work so well for Alcoholics Anonymous is how they are presented to us. They are presented to us as a series of suggestions and recommendations that we can accept or not. And so Alcoholics Anonymous carries the message that's been carried a long time ago. We carry the message, one alcoholic talking to another. Another teacher said that 2,000 years ago. He said, cast your bread upon the water, and it will be returned to you 100-fold. What we do is not new. The reason it works is because it's true. I go out to a sweat lodge in a place called Minot, North Dakota. It's a tribe of Chippewa Indians, and their sweat lodge is on the side of a mountain. It's called Turtle Mountain, and they're known as the Turtle Mountain Chippewa. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to a sweat lodge, but when the first time you go in, you have to walk up to the fire pit carrying a rock with no clothes on. So the first time I'm there, I'm walking down the aisle carrying this rock with no clothes on, butt naked. And there's the old elder in the back gets up and he points to me. And he says, Numark. I learned later on it says that Numark in Chippewa means bear. And a few minutes later, another one got up and pointed to me and said, Numark Ha. And it means the walking bear. What they were saying is I look like a bear. One of the elders got up and he told this story about the wounded healer. Tom mentioned this story this morning. And the wounded healer is an Indian spirit. And he doesn't do anything until a warrior gets wounded. And when a warrior is wounded, the spirit appears in front of him. And he has a wound exactly like the warrior's. And the warrior looks at the spirit's wound and he gets healed. And I said, that's what we do. That's what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. Every time we share our strength and our hope and our experience to somebody, we show them our wounds. And they get healed. We are all wounded healers. Toward the end of that pamphlet that I mentioned, A Member's Eye View, the writer takes kind of a biblical turn. And he talks about the time that John the Baptist was once again in one of Herod's prisons for about the 100th time. And while he was in prison, he heard about his cousin, Jesus. And Jesus was all about the land, doing all kinds of miraculous things. And John called two of his followers to him. He said, go and find Jesus and ask Jesus if he is the Messiah. Ask Jesus if he's the one we've been waiting for. Well, the two men go out and they find the Lord and they walk with him for a while. And then one day they ask him, are you the Messiah? Are you the one we've been waiting for? And Jesus didn't answer him directly. What he said was, go back to John and tell John only what you have seen and only what you have heard. Tell John that the blind can see and the deaf can hear and the lame can walk and the poor in spirit have been given the good news. Well, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I can make a report to you this afternoon if you'll accept it. I know for a fact the blind can see and the deaf can hear and the lame can walk and the poor in spirit have been given the good news. Alcoholics Anonymous is here for each and every one of you. God bless you all. Thank you.